An Ideal Husband is a four-act play by Oscar Wilde that revolves around blackmail and political corruption, and touches on the themes of public and private honor. It was first produced at the Haymarket Theatre, London in 1895 and ran for 124 performances. It has been revived in many theatre productions and adapted for the cinema, radio and television. In June 1893, with his second drawing room play, A Woman of No Importance, running successfully at the Haymarket Theatre, Oscar Wilde began writing An Ideal Husband for the actor-manager John Hare. He completed the first act while staying at a house he had taken at Goring-on-Thames, after which he named a leading character in the play. Between September 1893 and January 1894 he wrote the remaining three acts. Hare rejected the play, finding the last act unsatisfactory. Wilde then successfully offered the play to Lewis Waller, who was about to take temporary charge of the Haymarket in the absence in America of its usual manager, Herbert Beerbohm-Tree. The play was put into rehearsal in December 1894 and opened on 3 January 1895, billed as a new and original play of modern life. It ran at the Haymarket for 111 performances, regarded as a good run at the time. In April, on the last day of the Haymarket run, Wilde was arrested for gross indecency. His name was removed from the playbills and programs when the production transferred to the Criterion Theatre, where it ran for a further 13 performances, from 13 to the 27th of April. The play could have run longer at the Criterion, but the theatre was required by its proprietor, Charles Wyndham, for a new production. The play was published in 1899 in an edition of 1,000 copies. Wilde's name was not printed. The work was published as, by the author of Lady Windermere's Fan. It is dedicated to Frank Harris, a slight tribute to his power and distinction as an artist, his chivalry and nobility as a friend. The published version differs slightly from the performed play, as Wilde added many passages and cut others. Prominent additions included written stage directions and character descriptions. Wilde was a leader in the effort to make plays accessible to the reading public. Act 1. The Octagon Room in Sir Robert Chiltern's house in Grosvenor Square. Sir Robert, a member of the House of Commons and junior government minister, and his wife, Lady Chiltern, are hosting a gathering that includes his friend Lord Goring, a dandified bachelor, Chiltern's sister Mabel and other guests. During the party, Mrs. Cheveley, an enemy of Lady Chiltern from their school days, attempts to blackmail Sir Robert into supporting a fraudulent scheme to build a canal in Argentina. Her late mentor and lover, Baron Arnheim, induced the young Chiltern to sell him a cabinet secret which enabled Arnheim to buy shares in the Suez Canal Company 3 days before the British government announced its purchase of the company. Arnheim's payoff was the basis of Sir Robert's fortune, and Mrs. Cheveley has Robert's letter to Arnheim as proof of his crime. Fearing the ruin of both career and marriage, Sir Robert submits to her demands. When Mrs. Cheveley pointedly informs Lady Chiltern of Sir Robert's change of heart regarding the canal scheme, the morally inflexible Lady Chiltern, unaware of both her husband's past and the blackmail plot, insists that Sir Robert renege on his promise to Mrs. Cheveley. For Lady Chiltern, their marriage is predicated on her having an ideal husband, that is, a model spouse in both private and public life whom she can worship. Thus, Sir Robert must remain unimpeachable in all his decisions. Sir Robert complies with her wishes and apparently seals his doom. Toward the end of Act 1, Mabel and Lord Goring come upon a diamond brooch that Goring gave someone many years ago. He takes the brooch and asks Mabel to tell him if anyone comes to retrieve it. Act 2. Morning Room in Sir Robert Chiltern's house. Goring urges Chiltern to fight Mrs. Cheveley and admit his guilt to his wife. He also reveals that he and Mrs. Cheveley were once engaged. After finishing his conversation with Chiltern, Goring engages in flirtatious banter with Mabel. He also takes Lady Chiltern aside and obliquely urges her to be less morally inflexible and more forgiving. Once Goring leaves, Mrs. Cheveley appears, unexpected, in search of a brooch she lost the previous evening. Incensed at Chiltern's reneging on his promise, she exposes him to his wife. Lady Chiltern denounces her husband and refuses to forgive him. Act 3. The library of Lord Goring's house in Curzon Street. Goring receives a letter from Lady Chiltern asking for his help, a letter that could be misinterpreted as a compromising love note. Just as Goring receives this note, his father, Lord Caversham, drops in and demands to know when his son will marry. A visit from Chiltern, who seeks further counsel from Goring, follows. Meanwhile, Mrs. Cheveley arrives unexpectedly and, misrecognized by the butler as the woman Goring awaits, is ushered into Lord Goring's drawing room. While she waits, she finds Lady Chiltern's letter. Chiltern discovers Mrs. Cheveley in the drawing room and, convinced of an affair between these two former lovers, he storms out of the house. When Mrs. Cheveley and Lord Goring confront each other, she makes a proposal. Claiming to still love Goring from their early days of courtship, she offers to exchange Chiltern's letter for her old beau's hand in marriage. Lord Goring declines, accusing her of defiling love by reducing courtship to a vulgar transaction and ruining the Chilterns' marriage. He then springs his trap. Removing the diamond brooch from his desk drawer, he binds it to Cheveley's wrist with a hidden lock. Goring then reveals how the item came into her possession. She stole it from his cousin, Mary Berkshire, years ago. To avoid arrest, Cheveley must trade the incriminating letter for her release from the bejeweled handcuff. After Goring obtains and burns the letter, Mrs. Cheveley steals Lady Chiltern's note from his desk. Vengefully she plans to send it to Chiltern as, ostensibly, a love letter from Lady Chiltern to Goring. Mrs. Cheveley exits the house in triumph. Act 4. Samaya's Act 2. Lord Goring proposes to and is accepted by Mabel. Lord Caversham tells his son that Chiltern has denounced the Argentine Canal scheme in the House of Commons. Lady Chiltern appears, and Lord Goring tells her that Chiltern's letter has been destroyed but that Mrs. Cheveley has stolen her note and plans to use it to destroy her marriage. At that moment, Chiltern enters. While reading Lady Chiltern's letter, but as the letter does not have the name of the addressee, he assumes it is meant for him, and reads it as a letter of forgiveness. The two reconcile. Lady Chiltern initially agrees to support Chiltern's decision to renounce his career in politics, but Goring dissuades her from allowing her husband to resign. When Chiltern refuses Goring his sister's hand in marriage, still believing he has taken up with Mrs. Cheveley, Lady Chiltern is forced to explain last night's events and the true nature of the letter. Chiltern relents, and Goring and Mabel are permitted to marry. Lady Chiltern reaffirms her love for her husband and says, "For both of us a new life is beginning." In the Pall Mall Gazette, H.G. Wells wrote of the play. It is not excellent, indeed, after Lady Windermere's Fan and the Woman of No Importance, it is decidedly disappointing. But worse have succeeded, and it was at least excellently received. Ellipsis. But, taking it seriously, and disregarding any possibly imaginary tendency towards a new width of treatment, the play is unquestionably very poor. William Archer wrote, "An Ideal Husband is a very able and entertaining piece of work, charmingly written, wherever Mr. Wilde can find it in his heart to sufflaminate his wit. There are several scenes in which the dialogue is heavily overburdened with witticisms, not always of the best alloy. An Ideal Husband, however, does not positively lack good things, but simply suffers from a disproportionate profusion of inferior chatter." A.B. Walkley called the play, "a strepitous, polychromatic, scintillant affair, dexterous as a conjurer's trick of legerdemain, clever with a cleverness so excessive as to be almost monstrous and uncanny." He found the plot unbelievable, and thought that although the play, by sheer cleverness, keeps one continually amused and interested, Wilde's work was, not only poor and sterile, but essentially vulgar. Bernard Shaw praised the play, "In a certain sense Mr. Wilde is to me our only thorough playwright. He plays with everything. With wit, with philosophy, with drama, with actors and audience, with the whole theater. Such a feat scandalizes the Englishman." In 1996 the critic Byndon Russell wrote that An Ideal Husband is, the most autobiographical of Wilde's plays, mirroring, as it is, his own situation of a double life and an incipient scandal with the emergence of terrible secrets. Whilst Lord Goring is a character with much of Wilde's own wit, insight and compassion, Gertrude Chiltern can be seen as a portrait of Constance Wilde.